I read all these books, so you don't have to. Hey guys, it's Nik the Booksmith. Welcome back, welcome back. In today's video, I will show you a simplified method of creating a classic style text block. If that happens to float your goat, let's get started. Choosing paper. My first suggestion would be to choose the paper that you would like to use for your book block or text block. And whatever paper that would happen to be, you need to cut it twice as wide as you'll want it when it's folded. In this case, I cut it 9 by 6. That way when it's folded up, it will be 4.5 by 6. You also need to decide how many pages you want per signature. Of course, this is going to be personal preference, but if you use paper that is really heavy weight, you'll want less per signature than you would if it was thinner, like this. In my case, I've decided just to take 4 of these full sheets of paper, and then that way when they are folded up, there will be 8 pages, and then if you count front and back, that'll be 16. Another important point to think about is your grain direction on your paper. Optimally, you will want your grain to run parallel with the fold in your spine. Determining the grain of paper usually isn't too difficult. I will link a video below that goes into more detail about grain direction and what that looks like if you're interested. Also, another thing is that once you've got all of the papers that you want as the pages in your book, don't forget to make 2 end papers. The end papers will be the same size as the pages in your book, so that makes the measuring for them easy. And there's all kinds of things that you can use. You can use decorative designer paper, you can just use colored paper, or you can just use the same paper that you're using for the pages in your book. If you want them decorated, you could stamp on them or draw. You can use marbled paper, all kinds of things. Once you've decided on how many signatures you want and how many pages you want per signature, now comes the time to fold up your signatures. I am a proponent of folding them all together at once and not folding the pages one at a time. One of the ways that I like to do that is to use my paper trimmer because it has this little ledge here, and I can push one edge of the signature, the pages for the signature, up against that, and then fold it over and line up the top or the bottom, whichever one. And that way I know all of my ends are lined up and I don't have a crooked fold, if that helps. And I can just give that signature a crease with the bone folder and move on to the next one. Once all of my signatures have been folded, now comes the time to decide where you want your sewing stations, which are the holes that go through the signatures to sew everything together. Good news is that you don't have to necessarily measure these holes as far as how far they are from the edge or spaced apart from each other. The only important thing is that the holes that are poked in this signature match up with the holes that are poked in the rest of the signatures. So you want them to line up no matter where they are. Also, it doesn't matter too much how many sewing holes you have. You want your text block to be stable, so you want it sewn together in a way that creates stability and balance. In a book this size, is about 6 inches tall, I'm gonna go with 4, but you could go with 3 or 5 as well. If you want like a guideline, I'm gonna say make sure that there is a hole about every 1.5 inches or so, or however that can be evenly divided in your length of spine. For example, I'm gonna take a piece of paper that is the same size as my pages, same, or at least the same height. It doesn't have to be the same width. Matter of fact, I really don't want it that. I don't want it the same width. And I want, like I said, 4 holes. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in about 1/2 inch, which is about 12 millimeters from the top and the bottom. And then I'm just going to just guesstimate. I'm guesstimating and make 2 more. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark a T for whatever is going to be the top. At this point, these signatures don't really have a top and a bottom, but since they're laying here in this direction, this will be the top. Now, where is, I think a gremlin came in and took off with my little pokey tool, so I shall get another one. I'll just use this big needle. And I'll go ahead and poke these holes through. And then for each of the signatures, I will lay this inside. And since it's the same height, it's easy to make sure that it's even on the top and the bottom. And then I will poke through to transfer where these holes are to each signature. And just make sure that when you lay your signatures down, that you lay them down in the same way. You don't flip them over and lay them upside down, because now they have a top and a bottom. And there we go, all lined up. In order to simplify this process, there are some things that I have taken liberty to trim out. One of those things is that I won't be sewing on cords or tapes. I will just be sewing these together in a simple kettle stitch pattern. I'm going to use some blue embroidery floss so that you can more easily see what I'm doing. And I am not going to put a knot in the end. It's going to remain unknotted. So I'm going to lay those, mostly those aside, and I'm just going to take the first or last one, whatever it ends up being. And starting on the outside, from the outside, working my way in, I'm going to thread the needle through this bottom station hole. Then I'm going to go back through the next hole. Now I'm going to go in the next one up. And then out the top. And this first signature is sewn differently because I have to establish a base set of stitches. So I'm not stopping here. I'm going to go back in this second hole down. So I'm basically just doing figure eights, back and forth, back and forth. Then I'm going to go back out the bottom, or second to the bottom. Okay. Now I'm going to take my thread and make sure that it's not loosey-goosey. I don't want it loosey-goosey. And I'm going to tie these off down here at the bottom. So I'm going to cinch up the knot so that it is down here at the bottom hole. Like so. But this is the only signature that will get this kind of stitching treatment. So for the next signature, I'm going to just line it up with this one. And since this one's already knotted down here at the bottom, all I have to do is go in through this bottom hole in this new signature. And then I'll go out through the second hole up. And I'll just make sure that that is not so tight that you're going to rip your paper, because that wouldn't be great, but you want it snug so it's not loose. So on the second signature, what we have to do to attach it to the first one is I'm going to thread the needle underneath this length of stitching right here. And then I'm going to thread the needle back through the stretch of thread at the other side of the hole. And then I can go back in the new signature through that second hole up. Now I will go out the third hole up, and I'll do the same thing. I'll go under this stretch of thread to the right side of that hole, and then back through this stretch on the left side. Then you go back in through that new signature, through that same hole that we came out of earlier, and we go up to that top last hole. Now to secure it up at the top, all we have to do is go underneath this length of thread right here on the right side of the hole, and then we grab another signature and we go in the top hole of this signature. Now we're gonna go work our way back down. I'm gonna turn this around just so that it's a little easier from this direction. And I'm not gonna go underneath these stretches of thread like I did with that second signature. All I have to do now is thread the needle underneath this hole, because there is a stretch of stitching that goes from this hole down underneath this one. So there's a stretch of thread there and there's a stretch of thread there. So all I have to do is work the needle underneath that, like that, and then go back in that second hole that we just came out of. Now we go down to the next hole down here, and I'm going to go underneath that little stretch of thread between the first and second signature. And pull that tight and then bring it back in to the same hole we just came out of. We go down to the bottom and go out. And to secure the bottom of this one, all I have to do is thread the needle between the first and second signature, because there's a stretch of thread there. Now I grab another signature. And now I go into the bottom, since we're down at the bottom, I go into this bottom stitching hole, and then I go back out through the second, pull that taut. Now I need to loop my needle between the last two signatures, because we keep making these little kettle stitches. They're like a ladder and they keep attaching. And then you go back in that second hole, and then you go out the next hole up, and the same thing again. Between the last two signatures, you just thread that needle underneath that link stitch there, and then go back in the same hole. And now you go out the top and thread the needle underneath that link stitch between the last two, and there you go. Now I grab another signature, and it doesn't matter how many holes you have, you would just do the exact same thing. And I will go in the top hole now, that because we're at the top, and I'll go out through the next one. Make sure my stitches are snug. And then I will run that needle between the last two signatures underneath that little link stitch at the hole, and then back in. And then out through the next one down, and between the last two signatures under the link stitch, and then back in, and then out through the bottom, and then between the last two signatures underneath that link stitch. But I don't go back in the hole. That's the only difference between the top and the bottom, is you don't go back in the signature. You just grab a new signature and you go in through whatever hole it matches up with. And that's how you link them together at the top and the bottom. I go back out, next hole up, go underneath that link stitch between the last two signatures, and then back through that same hole. And then back out through the next hole up. And I'm going to run it between the last two signatures under that link stitch. I go back in this hole and then out through the top like that. If you have some chipboard, this is just some hardboard that I have. Make sure everybody is all lined up. And then clamp these down here. And that should somewhat hold it up, like so. Now I just need some glue. You don't want it like all shoved real super tight. You just want everything straight at the top and the bottom. And you want everybody all lined up. And now I'm just going to take some of this. It's just this PVA glue, just white glue. And I just brush a layer on. And what this does is it attaches the paper together at the spine. So like these little gaps between the signatures get glued together so that theoretically you shouldn't be able to see between those when it's in the book cover. It should be all glued together. You just want a nice coat of glue that fills in those gaps, but you don't want it like dripping through. And this should also seal up any knots that you have back here. Okay, I'm going to give this a chill pill for a moment, and it doesn't need to be completely dry for the next step, but we just want it mostly dry.
A few minutes later.
All right, we are almost done. This is still a little bit tacky. Relatable, am I right? But at this point, you have a couple of decisions that you can make. First, we have to put on the end papers. Probably should have done that before I glued up the spine, but it doesn't matter. But before I do that, if you have the means or the sheer determination to use a craft knife and a straight edge, if you want to clean up the foredge, now would be the time to do that, because when you fold all those 4 papers together, they're going to be different lengths. They're not going to be super exact. So I'm gonna go do that real quick, but I think I'll put the end papers on first. So let me grab those. So I fold these papers, the ones that are the same size as the pages. But if they're decorative, you fold the pretty part on the inside like that. And I don't fold it, I don't like crease this like super. I will mark a guideline just to show you for an example. When we tip on these end papers, which that's what it's called when you glue these on, you only glue it to like a 1/4 inch of a space next to the spine. So I'm just going to put a little bit of a guideline there just so that you could see what I was talking about. And with a paintbrush, I'm just going to put white glue in that little space right there. And I take one of these papers and I just line it up with the fold lined up with the folds at the spine, and just make sure that everything's lined up in this direction as well. Technically, I would do this before gluing up the spine. I would do this after I sewed everything together, but before gluing up the spine. But it wouldn't be a Nik the Booksmith video if I remembered everything. I mean, I'd be asking a lot, and it would be somebody else's video. So I'm going to leave that open. And I'll glue up this other side. I will take the other one. And I do the exact same thing. And I will let that dry before I trim up the foredge. Now I have a paper cutter that cuts the foredge. It'll cut the foredge of a book. Not everybody is going to have that. The way it's traditionally done is with a plow inside a book press, and the plow has a razor blade type cutting edge, and it gets run along the foredge and it just slices off the uneven edge. You don't have to slice off the uneven edge. I mean, you can just leave it as it is. The bookbinding police will not come and get you and take you to bookbinding prison if you leave it the way it is. However, if you want to cut it off, you either have to have a paper trimmer, or you have a plow and press, or you have nerves of steel and you get your book block or text block, it's the same thing, in some kind of situation where it's not going to be shifting around on you, and you get a straight edge and you line it up so that the straight edge also is not going to shift around on you, because if one or the other shifts, then anything that you're slicing off the edge with, you know, a knife of some sort, it's just going to keep getting more and more and more and more uneven. Like when you're cutting your own bangs, that analogy. That analogy works with so many things. And some of us learn from those mistakes and some of us don't. I'm one of those that it took a few times to learn. But if it makes you nervous, don't trim it. Just leave it. Leave it. It's going to be all right. Sometimes your library may have some kind of a paper trimmer like that they might allow you to borrow. I don't know. I don't know if you're allowed to go to the library and use their paper trimmer. I don't know. Do they have paper trimmers you can use? Some schools will have that. I don't know if you could go to somewhere like print shops, like the FedEx store or Staples or Office Max or Office Depot. I don't know why those have to be named so close. I think they're even owned by the same company, which is, you know, another wow. There's a rabbit hole. And maybe they would charge you to I don't know. That's why I bought my own. It wasn't that expensive, and I figured for somebody who makes books, maybe it would be a good investment. But not everybody's going to want to do that. And it's a luxury, but it's not a have to. So anyway, I will go trim this and then finish up the last step. And I took the liberty to go ahead and trim the head and tail so that everything is smooth and even all the way around, which may or may not matter to you. However, there are a couple, let me scoot back a little bit. There are a couple of things that you can do before the very last step. And one is, let me grab my mallet. If you want to round the spine just a little bit, I usually pull up about, I don't know, a little hunk of pages right here. And I'll put my first finger inside and I'll put my thumb against the foredge so that I can pull with these 3 fingers. And you can just give this top corner a little bit of a tap. And then you turn it over, you grab a hunk of pages, put your thumb on the foredge and pull with those 3 fingers. And what the thumb does is it holds the foredge from scooting forward while you tap this corner forward a little bit. This is absolutely not necessary at all. However, if you want a little bit of a rounding to your spine before you put it into a book cover, that will help give it a little bit of a curve. And then the last thing that you do is you take a piece of fabric. Traditionally, it's a open woven fabric that has stiffener added to it, and it's called mull or super. Basically, it's reinforcement, and you want it a little shorter than the book block. I'm going to say, I don't know, at least ½ an inch. But you can just use a regular piece of cotton. A thin fabric is what I suggest. Just use a scrap of fabric from an old dress shirt or pillowcase or it doesn't matter. And the last step is that it gets glued onto the spine. And you want it a good, I don't know, inch at least on either side to hang over. If it's a very big book, like if it's a big heavy text block that you're going to be binding into a book cover, you might even give it a little bit more, maybe 2 inches. It just will give more stability to the binding when you attach the book block to the cover. In this case, this is a small book and an inch overhang on either side will be sufficient. Now, if this was a traditional text block, I would be backing after I rounded. So this is the rounding, and I did a very slight rounding, but traditionally after the rounding is done, then the text block is placed into a lying press with backing boards, and the backing boards have angular metal edges that will sandwich on either side of the text block. And then you take your, not this one, but you take a little hammer, a little flat, like a cobbler's hammer, and you would tap the edge of the text block so that it folds over. I'll put some images on screen to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. This backing is done to reduce the width of the spine because we've sewn stitches through these folds, and because the paper is folded, that adds bulk and width to this end of the book as opposed to this end of the book. Then that allows the book boards, so here's the book boards, that allows the book boards to fit into that little mushroom cap edge, and it gives the book more stability when it's sitting on the shelf so that the stitches won't be pulled loose by gravity over time. Rounding and backing in a classic traditional method is not an easy thing to do in a YouTube video and explain in just a few minutes. It takes a lot of practice, and ideally you'd want to be trained by a master bookbinder. Every book is going to require a different amount of backing done to it to even everything up and for the book boards to fit properly. While it's something that I can do, I don't think I'm proficient enough at it to teach it. I will leave that up to the masters. It also takes specialty equipment that most people don't have. So even though I'm not teaching that in making this text block, I did want to explain it to you and also to explain why I'm not showing that right now. I don't want you guys to feel like you have to buy a lying press and backing boards and, you know? Anyway, that was a rabbit hole, wasn't it? So what I'm going to do is put a little more glue on the back of this spine. If you wanted to leave the spine flat like it was before I put this slight little curve on it, that is absolutely perfectly fine. Some book covers have a rigid spine anyway built into the cover. In that case, you wouldn't want it rounded anyway. I usually round mine if I'm going to be putting my book blocks into some kind of a flexible material for the cover. If it's going to be rigid, like with a piece of chipboard to line the spine of the book cover, then I do not round it because there's no reason. Okay, I'm just going to lay that on there. And if you want to run a little glue over the top just to seal that in. And there we go. Now when this gets put into a book cover, these little flaps will get glued down to the back side of this end paper, and then this end paper will get glued to the inside of the book cover. And you can see how this fabric will help reinforce the back of this paper so that this hinge won't just be relying on paper glued in. It'll have this reinforcement. So that probably helps make a little bit more sense as to why that gets put on there. There are some other steps that can be done beyond this, but it will depend on the kind of book cover it goes into. Like at this point, if we wanted to put on headbands, we could do that, but it would depend on the kind of book cover it was going into. We could also do an Oxford Hollow at this point, but that is a whole other ball game. So this is the basic text block, and there have been many of my videos where I have shown how to make a cover where something like this is inserted next. So that's why I was just going to kind of stop here, because this is kind of the basic premise. If you liked this video and would like to try to make a text block and then put it into a cover, I will list a video under this one that will kind of continue on and show you a cover that you could put a text block like this inside. But that will be all for this one. Thank you all for hanging out with me. I hope everybody is having a great day, and I will see you all really, really soon in the next video. Bye, guys.